I'm Christopher Lydon, and this is Open Source, entranced in Molly Crabapple's reanimation of the Jewish Labour Bund in Europe and Russia of a century ago. Yiddish Socialism was a nickname. You could plausibly describe that old Bund, I think, as forgotten but not gone in the wider world today. The question may be whether the Bund's humane ideals will have another chance against the lawlessness and cruelty of the 2020s. Molly Crabapple, welcome back. We know you as a one-off writer and artist, pens and paintbrushes at the ready, a sort of global muckraker in the rough places of the world. Last time you were here, you were just back from civil war in Syria. This time, you're just back from unearthing history, World War I time, through an epidemic of hellish and deadly pogroms in pre-revolutionary Russia. The Bund, created in Poland, was a tough-minded working-class alliance demanding full rights for Jews at home. It was irreconcilably embattled against the rising young Zionist movement that would establish a separate state for Jews in Palestine. You took it on yourself, Molly, and you learned the Jewish language as part of the job to research and write the whole story of the Jewish Bund, the old politics in it, the modern emotions that it still stirs, starting with the restored memory of your own family. And you've made a monumental book of it under the title, Here Where We Live Is Our Country. Congratulations, just to begin. Did you know you were writing a bestseller?
Everyone dreams of writing a bestseller, but I will admit that when I started to do a book about an anti-Zionist socialist Jewish movement, I was not necessarily thinking of the commercial potential.
Did you know what you were getting into? History coming back on itself, the engagement of your own heart in this history, the meaning for all of us of a movement that was defeated but not destroyed.
I did this book out of complete obsession. There's no other way to describe it. This is my third book, and I think of all of them, it's the one that had the most love and madness in it. I started researching the Jewish Labour Bund over 10 years ago. I had known about the group because of my great-grandfather, Samuel Rothbard, who was a post-impressionist painter and who, though he died before I was born, was someone who profoundly influenced my life. He was like a substitute father figure for my mother, and he taught my mother how to paint. And my mother, she taught me how to paint. So I always viewed being a painter as this gift from Sam. And one body of work that he had that obsessed me when I was young was a body of work that he called the memory paintings, which were paintings that he made to resurrect the murdered world of Volkovisk, the small town that he was born in. And in Poland, between the wars, now in Belarus, then in the Russian Empire, it was borderlands, and borders shifted a lot in the first half of the 20th century. But it was Russia when he left. He called it Russia-Poland. And these paintings, they were like every aspect of life. They were him in religious school doing cruel caricatures of his rabbi and then getting his ass beat. They were him like at synagogue. They were of brawls. They were him being like a naughty boy spying on the women in the bathhouse. There was one that I really loved, and it was a painting of a young woman with a long skirt on a miserable dirt road throwing rocks through a window. And next to her is her boyfriend with more rocks. And the painting was titled Itka the Bundist. And that was how the seed of this project was planted in me. It was through that watercolor from Sam.
So much of this is new to me, and I wasn't prepared for example, the unending nightmare of pogroms in Russia, just as ugly and cruel as slavery and Jim Crow in the American South, through roughly the same period.
It was astounding. I think one of the things that's hard for a lot of people to understand now is that in the Tsarist Empire, being Jewish wasn't just a religion. You were a racialized minority. You were someone who had a specific legal code that was meant to constrict your future, constrict your movements, and in many ways blight your life. And as we know, whenever a state targets a minority like that, it also leads to just a ton of racism, right? A ton of just like freelance racism and violence as well. And one aspect of that were these pogroms that really were a way that the state would deflect the frustrations over their incompetent government, over the autocratic regime, onto a minority scapegoat, in this case, the Jews. And these were shockingly violent. These were not like Fiddler on the Roof, like a blanket getting torn up. These were 800 people being slaughtered in the course of several days in Odessa. Yeah. One of the things that I found that was amazing was I looked a lot at the New York Age, which was a black newspaper, the preeminent black newspaper, in fact, being published in America. And they were covering the pogroms every week. And they were drawing direct parallels between the pogroms in Russia and these white racist mob murders that were tearing through the American South at the same time.
Lynchings, I'm sure.
Like more than lynchings, like attacks on whole cities, right? Like the destruction of Black Tulsa, for instance.
The other thing I wasn't prepared for was the tough courage of the Jewish resistance and the heroic part that women took in the fighting. Not all of them feminists exactly, but heroic women. Introduce a few.
Women were like just a key part of the Bund from the start. And they weren't just, the stereotypical role of like nurses and caretakers. You had women like Nadezhda Grinfeld, who led the self-defense squads in Odessa in the 1905 revolution and took a bullet in her leg for it. You had women like Anna Lipschitz, who was a street orator, who was nicknamed the Fury by the press. You had women who smuggled guns, who smuggled pamphlets taped to their bodies like pregnant bellies. Women who tried to assassinate governors, who rotted in jail, who traveled continents with fake passports, who were theoreticians and who were street fighters.
Do you want to speak of Sofia Dubnova and her husband, Henrik Ehrlich?
Oh, yeah. Sofia Dubnova was my personal favorite character in the book. I had more of a crush on Bernard Goldstein, the head of the Warsaw Self-Defense Militia.
The toughest man, the bruiser.
A total bruiser. But we'll talk about Bernard later. Sofia was the one I felt closest to. Sofia was the daughter of the renowned Jewish historian Simon Dubnov, a great historian of the diasporist. She joined the Bund when she was a teenager. She incited a military mutiny at the Grodno garrison. She smuggled pamphlets. She hid fugitives. She was in every way a frontline participant, revolutionary, but she was also an artist. She was an avant-garde Russian poet who never felt totally at home with the Puritanism and the stick-up-the-acidness of many of her Marxist colleagues. She was someone who loved to dress up for artists' costume balls. She loved Paris. She loved to recite her poetry in like smoky basement cabarets. I think I felt such kinship with her because as someone who's been involved in leftist politics my own life, but who's also an artist and a skeptic by nature, when I read her memoir, Bread and Matzah, I was like you and me, Sophia. And her husband was Henrik Ehrlich. Henrik Ehrlich was a brilliant lawyer. He was one of the founders of the Petrograd Soviet during the early days of the February Revolution in 1917. And he was the leader of the Bund in interwar Poland. He was a trade union leader, a city councilman, a ferocious critic of totalitarianism and ethno-nationalism of all stripes, a brilliant writer, and he's also the grandfather of my friend, Mark Ehrlich, who lives in Boston, who's a union leader himself.
Here's you on Henrik Ehrlich in the book. History had few surprises for Henrik Ehrlich. He had been in and out of jail, seen an empire fall, participated in one revolution and been the victim of a second. He had lost 2 countries and been condemned to death. A believer in humane, democratic socialism, he had watched Europe collapse into irrational slaughter, despite the entreaties of intellectuals like himself, yet he still tried. This was the world. There was no other. It was worth fighting for.
That paragraph was written about this pretty brutal moment in Henrik Ehrlich's life. When the Nazis invaded Poland in 1939, the Bund was at its very peak, and Henrik Ehrlich was a major celebrity. They had just swept all of the municipal elections in Poland. They were the most popular Jewish party in the country. And when the Nazis invaded, the Bund's leadership had this very brutal choice over whether they should stay in Warsaw, even though the Polish national government had abandoned the city, or whether they should try to flee east and reconstitute. And eventually the top leadership, of which Henrik Ehrlich was one, decided to try to flee east. But as we know, the Soviets would invade a few weeks later due to the Hitler-Stalin pact that partitioned Poland. And Henrik Ehrlich quickly found himself arrested by the Soviets, along with the man that he co-led the Bund with, Victor Alter. And they were arrested because the Soviets had no room for competing visions of socialism. And also they kept very long grudges. And he had opposed the October Revolution in 1917. It's only 22 years, Memories are long. And he was arrested and interrogated and sentenced to death. But then after a series of catastrophic military losses to Nazi Germany, the Soviet Union let Victor Alter and Henrik Ehrlich out of prison and asked them to organize something called the Jewish Anti-Fascist Committee. And the moment that I imagined Ehrlich thinking those lines was when him and Victor Alter were in Kubayshev, the town that all of the Soviet bigwigs had been evacuated to keep them out of the jaws of the advancing Nazi army. And in some ways, even though he's out of jail, he's still a prisoner, right? Like his every motion is still controlled. He's still being watched by the NKVD. But even in this narrow confine of freedom, he's still trying to fight. He's trying to advocate to get fellow revolutionaries out of the Gulag. He's trying to organize Jewish resistance. He's trying to advocate for Jewish soldiers in this new sort of Polish exile army called Anders' Army. He's trying to fight still. He's still trying to fight even in this narrow window of freedom.
Your great-grandfather, Sam Rothbart, sort of hero throughout the book, Molly, had Bundism down in a capsule as he wrote in a note to himself that you say your mother found. This is what he wrote, basically arguing that the world was born new in the 1890s. He wrote, "No more Jew, no more Goy, and no more God. A world of brothers, working men from all the nations, be united," was to be the slogan. Overnight, Sam wrote, "I threw off humble Judaism and became a world brother." It's fantastic.
It's amazing. I mean, Sam came, like so many Jewish people of that era, he came from a very conservative background. His mother got married when she was 12. His father studied Talmud while his mother did backbreaking work with her little flour mill in order to provide money for the family, typical arrangement of that era. And to join the Bund meant really a break with a very strict, rigorous religious world. It meant things that would have been impossible before, like dating girls, or not even dating girls, but just having female friends, being alone with women you weren't married to, doing something on Friday night, violating Shabbos. And violating Shabbos in that era, that could mean something as simple as picking up a stick on Shabbos. It meant reading secular books. Imagine that, books on not just revolutionary texts, but Darwin, books of poetry, Pushkin, all of these things. It might mean violating kosher laws. It might mean choosing your own wife, not going through a matchmaker. It might mean relating to non-Jews as friends and comrades. All of these things were huge ruptures in that very conservative Jewish world. And the Bund early on was quite anti-religious. It wasn't just like a secular thing. They're kind of dicks about it, I'm going to be honest. The way that, many a Catholic schoolboy who has had his knuckles rapped by the nuns develops like a true hatred of Catholicism. I feel like many Bundists were like that. Like they would walk around smoking cigarettes with their girlfriends on Yom Kippur just to scandalize people, right? They'd serve pastries fried in pig fat just to get a rise out of people. They'd serve ham sandwiches on Yom Kippur, kind of like jerks,
Nat Hentoff, remembering growing up in Boston, said he used to sit out on the stoop next to the synagogue eating ham sandwiches as the faithful marched in.
Exactly. I have many friends who are girls who are raised Catholic who delight in wearing slutty nuns outfits on Halloween. I think it's a pretty similar thing. But what I would say also with the Bundists is though they themselves, their leadership were atheists, and though they, like to poke at religious conservatism, they also defended religious Jews. And I have this story. It's from Lodz, Łódź in Polish pronunciation, in the 30s, where this Bundist, he describes how Polish nationalists would go on Saturdays and wait outside the synagogues to beat Orthodox Jews when they were coming out of synagogue. And then the Bundists would wait with baseball bats to defend the Orthodox from the Polish anti-Semites. And then the Orthodox would yell at the Bundists for violating Shabbos by carrying baseball bats.
So here, with your permission, is Bundism in short. It's secular, socialist, militant against displacement of other populations. It's gritty, anti-nationalist, combative. Was it democratic?
Yes.
It was universalist, maybe utopian in the spirit of Marx's Workers of the World Unite. It was thoughtful, self-critical, and self-confident. More than one of your star Bundists summed things up as Henrik Ehrlich did in 1942. He said, "I die knowing I was right."
The first time I heard someone saying "I die knowing I was right" was Mark Lieber, who was in the Gulag. He was another Bundist. In 1936, he was in the Gulag. And an Italian socialist came across him there. And he asked him what his last testament would be to the world, because the Italian socialist knew that as a foreigner, he would be released. And Mark Lieber says, "Tell my friends, I die knowing that I'm a socialist, and I die knowing that I am right." And over again, you see the sentiment reflected over and over again. I was right, because they were right.
Speak of three loaded words that come up again and again in your book and your account of these people. First, the word here-ness.
Doikite, yes.
Yeah, meaning the local scene, eye contact, elementary, everyday human rights, the basics. Second word, ethno-nationalism, you use it. That was a scare word and an evil thing, seen always as a prelude to imperialism, fascism, and violence. And third, you could talk all day on this, solidarity is the ultimate standard of right thinking and righteous action. What does that word mean? Solidarity with whom?
With your fellow humans, especially your fellow humans under the boot of the oppressor.
How would they invoke it?
In all sorts of ways, from the most sort of prosaic and practical to the most tragically heroic. It could be how at Medem Sanatorium, which was the jewel of the Bund social network, it was a sanatorium for slum kids at risk for tuberculosis, but it was so much more than that. It was like a Montessori school and utopian community that Einstein admired. In Medem Sanatorium, they wouldn't just take in Jewish kids. They took in Polish children, especially the Polish children of striking miners who were starving. So that sort of basic action, right? The sharing of food, the making of solidarity kitchens, the protests in support of Red Spain, the articles in support of socialists in China. But when I think of like this one moment where I'm like, this is solidarity as the most tragic sort of heroism, it's when the Bund and the rest of the Warsaw Jews are locked into the ghetto and the ghetto is being liquidated. 60,000 people a day are being deported to Treblinka. And in this time, Bundist leaders, they send a message on an illegal radio to the Bundist representative in London, Arthur Ziegelboim. And the message, after talking obviously about the genocide, it's also, we demand the freedom for Mahatma Gandhi, who had just been arrested by the British, and they demanded the freedom for India.
Wow. And they probably always said human solidarity.
Exactly.
Go back, if you will, here-ness. There's a wonderful immediacy of it.
Here-ness is something that utterly runs through the Bund's entire philosophy. And it's actually a more defiant statement than it might appear at first. It's the assertion that these countries, these lands where Jews lived, and where Jews had lived for 1,000 years, were their homes, the same way that they were the homes of the Polish or Russian or Ukrainian people who lived there. And this statement might seem obvious at first, but it was said in a context where everything was trying to uproot Jews from these homes, where everyone in power was saying that Jews did not belong in Europe, that they were harmful foreigners who ought to get the fuck off to somewhere else, whether Madagascar or Palestine or wherever, hell probably. And so when the Bund said that these lands were their country, it had this real just defiance and grit to it, right? And also it implied that they were willing to defend it, right? I always say it had like an implied motherfucker at the end. Here where we live is our country, motherfucker. It was something that was hard to say. And there's like many registers. Sometimes it's defiant, sometimes it's proud, and sometimes it's tragic, right? Because these countries did not agree. They did not agree that here was Jews' country. And, you know, in one article, I compared this concept to the Palestinian concept of samud, steadfastness, this steadfast determination to remain rooted in your land despite all the predations and all the violence of the Israeli state. To me, that's what here-ness is. And it's utterly opposed to the Zionist idea that Jews could only be safe and free in their very own ethnically cleansed ethno-state.
The context of today, Molly, 2026, is critical in all of this. We're reading your history of a century back. You wrote it through what you call Israel's live stream genocide of Palestinians in Gaza. You did a lot of your writing, you say, at a desk in the New York Public Library, but you went out to the street now and then to join protests against Israel's wars in the Middle East. I'd love to hear the live stream of your head as you were going back and forth.
I mean, I had been working on this book. It took me about 7 years to write, but the real meat of the writing was when I got the Cullman Center Fellowship at the New York Public Library, which is an astounding thing. They give you a room and they give you money, but the room has glass walls. And so the boss of the program knows if you're there or not, and he'll take away your money if you don't show up. So it's really good. It keeps you honest. And so I did the majority of the writing there. And I got the fellowship. It started September 2023. I had last been in Palestine in May 2023 that year as a guest of the Palestine Festival of Literature. I had presented on the Bund in Ramallah at the Khalil Sakakini Cultural Center. And so many of my dearest friends are Palestinian. So many of my intellectual inspirations are Palestinian, people whose subtlety of thought, whose generosity of spirit, whose genius, whose ferocious analysis so shaped how I think about the world. And they very much shaped this book. And to have those sort of relationships and to have that recent and very powerful visit to Palestine and to have been to Gaza, where I know people, and then to see this revolting genocide carried out by a state that claims my own identity as some sort of excuse. It was something that did me in. I mean, I was utterly shattered by it. And like so many people are, and especially because, we protested, we, fundraised, wrote articles, signed open letters, all of these things that were futile. In the end, the genocide continues and has now spread to southern Lebanon. And there was this strange double vision of forensically reconstructing the liquidation of the Warsaw Ghetto while watching the liquidation of Gaza.
Can't imagine it. I'm so glad you speak so freely about it.
What's going to happen to me? I mean, sometimes I feel like there's a lot of unnecessary cowardice. I was joking with a friend, obviously I get lots of mean emails, right? And mean comments and everything on Instagram. But I was like, are these people that are writing me these horrible things, are they going to come to my events and punch me in the face, or even scream in my face? I've had other people who disagreed with me do that. But I was like, are Zionists going to do that? Because they write me so many mean things. And I even had a big burly guy friend of mine walk me to and from my gigs at first. But no one ever came. The worst thing that happened was a few elderly people, they raised their hand and they said irate things to me at events, which is something that I can more than handle. And I'm like, why should I be afraid? Why should I be afraid?
You even get bad reviews in Commentary magazine.
Oh, no. John Podaritz, he's very angry at me. He, for over a decade, he's had a thing for me. He used to call me a saucy little number. And I've committed the cardinal sin that a woman can do. I reached 42 years old. And now he called me a middle-aged screedmeister and an enemy to her people.
All the time you were writing this book, you were texting back and forth with your friend, initial J, in Gaza, when people were trying to help him get out of there. Summarize some of that correspondence.
Jay is a fixer I worked with when I was in Gaza in 2015. He is a funny, sarcastic, tough dude who likes to make videos of himself, like driving in his car set to like hip hop music. He's great. He has 4 adorable little boys, and he is a fucking blast if you ever hang out with him. And after the genocide began, of course, I was very worried about him. And like many people, I set up a fundraising campaign for him the same way, countless people have. And at the time, there was a way where you could pay, basically, to get out of Gaza. That was in the first few months of the genocide. And we successfully raised $70,000 to evacuate my friend and his family. And we brought it all to Egypt, because you had to bring it to Egypt in cash to pay people. And then Israel invaded Rafah, and that way of leaving was shut. And it's been shut ever since. And this cool dude I know and his lovely wife and his parents and his 4 adorable little boys are still fucking stuck in a killing cage.
It's powerful that the last words in the text of the book are, to the Palestinian people.
Yes. I mean, I owe them so much, and the world owes them so much, and they've gotten so little of what they deserve.
I've heard you say in other interviews that you come to think of the story of the Bund as a kind of cover story for the whole period, including this moment. There's something of everything in it. You say, the more I dug into the Bundist past, the more I realized that it was not past at all. It was rather a candle to illuminate the tumultuous present. The Bundists, you write, built alternate worlds of beauty, of courage, and of hope, which allowed their people to persevere even in the midst of an apocalypse. Their ideas are still vital today. The Bund was a Jewish group, but its history is not for Jews alone. It belongs to all of us who believe in the necessity of human solidarity. In the story of the Bund, across geographies, ages, and faiths, I found the story of our time, a blueprint for survival, a cautionary tale of death, and a philosophy that might yet save us. Can you imagine a Bundist movement in this country, in this very, very troubled, maybe depressed, maybe who knows what state?
I mean, there are groups of young people all over the country that are making groups inspired by the Bund right now. There's this huge urge and need, really, especially that young Jewish people have, to reclaim their identity and their history and their ancestors from this genocidal ethno-state that has appropriated them. And I think that that's very much behind the resurgence of these amazing groups. But I also don't think of the Bund as a group that's for Jews alone. I think that there's this specific form it took, but I think that there's also, I think it belongs to the whole left, basically. I think that its message of solidarity across difference, I think that the fierce networks of mutual aid it built, I think its toughness, I think its ethics that were utterly foundational to it, I think these are things that belong to all rebels and radicals and that all of us can learn from. And I think especially at this moment of multi-directional crisis, of rising fascism here, of immigrants locked in a vast concentration camp network, of war, of genocide, I think that the Bund has so many lessons for us in its successes and in its failures.
You were discovering, it seems to me, in yourself something more than nostalgia for universal and liberal values. You write that the Bundists came to feel like kin. The Bund's philosophy spoke to my sense of Jewishness in a way neither the synagogue nor Israel ever had. You had met people that you wanted to be, in some sense.
Or that I wouldn't say that I wanted to be them, but that I felt like I knew. And I think the Jewishness I'm talking about is the Jewishness of the left, right? So much of the history of the 20th century left is the history of Jewish rebels. And the 19th century left, for that matter, people like Karl Marx, Rosa Luxemburg, Lassalle, Trotsky, these amazing Bundist leaders, American socialists like Meyer London, Victor Berger, the two socialist congressmen, Emma Goldman. This thread of Jewish leftism has always been the Jewishness I felt most comfortable with and that has felt most like mine. And, you know, there's often this like impetus in writing history, this idea that to be taken seriously, you have to take the past and you have to sort of put it in its like little box where it has nothing to do with us. And these people are like fucking dinosaurs and you couldn't imagine what they would have been like. And they're so different. But these people didn't feel that different to me. They felt like people I knew, including with all of the irritating things about them, all of the silliness, all of the beefs, all of the ridiculous foibles of the left that I know so well, but also, you know, the heroism and creativity and love. I felt like so many of the experiences that I had had or that I had covered as a journalist, they had echoes of these experiences the Bundists had of being arrested, of passing out pamphlets to strangers, of setting up community soup kitchens for refugees, of arguing at meetings over minutia, of all of these things, right, that are so intrinsic to the experience of being in a movement. And when I wrote about these things, I didn't want to pretend that I didn't know about them. I felt like false, you know. It's not nostalgia. That's not the right word. It's more just an acknowledgement that the past bleeds into the present, that they're not separate, that we are of the same cloth as they are.
I kept looking for traces of Bundism in our own American world. I kept thinking of Bernie Sanders.
Yes, exactly. And Zoran Mamdani as well reminds me of this. And Brad Lander. The whole resurgent DSA left is so much in that tradition. I wrote an article for The Guardian about the ways that I feel that Zoran Mamdani's campaign drew from the tradition of like New York Yiddish socialism, of the thick culture, of the immigrant alliances, of the sewer socialism, of the high-flown oratory, of so much of it. I mean, sometimes I would see Zoran's speeches and I would see the echoes of Meyer London, who is a great socialist congressman he's not a Bundist himself, but he's a fundraiser for Bundists and a friend of Bundists. He's part of the larger milieu. And I really feel that humane democratic socialism that's attentive to difference and that's respectful of difference, but that sees the possibilities of solidarity across it, is so much a legacy of Jewish socialism.
Yeah. Dan Chasen's wonderful book about Bernie Sanders, Bernie for Burlington, is a portrait of a Bundist at work over a lifetime, bringing Vermont into another range of politics, learning a lot from Vermont, but there it is. He practiced it every day.
Here-ness.
Total here-ness. You say not the least treasure to come out of this whole story is Yiddish culture, of which Fiddler on the Roof is a tiny token from the stories of Sholem Aleichem, referring also to the Odessa stories, probably, of the immortal Isaac Babel, in the company, often referred to as the greatest of the Russian Jewish writers, but surely in the company of Chekhov and Dostoevsky. But speak of that culture and the language you learned and what it implies to you in a real way for us today.
Well, Yiddish was the language of Eastern European Jews, and especially of the Eastern European Jewish working class, the people who did not learn the fancy languages of empire, the people who did not learn to speak Russian for social advancement because they were workers. It was and is a language that's funny, gritty, polyvocal, cosmopolitan. It comes from Old High German, then written with Hebrew letters and filled with Hebrew words that are pronounced differently than they are in Hebrew. And then it picks up other words from every single country that it's been in, whether these are words from Russian or Ukrainian or the Yiddish that's spoken by the religious Jews in my neighborhood has tons of English to it. You hear like sale, businessman. It's a language of an incredibly rich culture of songs, of music, of plays, of, movies like the Debuk, right, from the 1930s, of crushingly beautiful poetry. And just of like witticisms. I mean, this is a language that at this point, you cannot be a New Yorker without knowing some Yiddish, right? There's no New York English without schmooze and ganef and shyster and schmear and all of that. Like, it's so intrinsic to how a New Yorker talks. And at the time that the Bund was founded, Yiddish was really looked down on. It was called a jargon. It was not considered a real language, certainly not a great language of empire like Russian or French. And the Bund devoted huge resources to the dignity of Yiddish, the championing of it. The Bundist Max Weinreich, he had an amazing slogan where he said, "A dialect is just a language without a navy."
That's great.
A dialect is just
That's here-ness too, right?
Exactly. And, the Zionists were intensely concerned with the resurrection of Hebrew, right? The usage of modern Hebrew for the state building project. And Yiddish, to them, they were revolted by it. It like smacked of the diaspora. There's stories of David Ben-Gurion after the war going to a lecture by a female partisan, a woman who herself had been a Zionist and was a hero. And he heckled her because he said, "Why are you speaking Yiddish?" Imagine that. And the Bund instead said, no, this is our language, and it's a working class language. It's not a language of empire. It's not a language with battleships, but it is just as beautiful and just as dignified as anyone else's language. And so much of the preservation of secular Yiddish, as opposed to Hasidic Yiddish, which is also wonderful, but, a different culture, so much of the preservation of secular Yiddish comes from people who had been Bundists or who were close to the Bundist milieu. I mean, after the war, many former Bundist partisans who came to New York, they ended up getting jobs at YIVO, the Institute for the Study of Eastern European Jewish Culture. And even though they had lost literally everything else, they had lost their homelands, they had lost their families, they had lost their possessions, they had lost their country, they'd lost everything, but they kept Yiddish, they kept this language, and they nourished it, and they kept it, if not totally alive, they kept that fucking spark, right? They kept the burning coal so it could be taken up by other people. And the Yiddish language revival owes so much to the efforts of those Bundists. I studied Yiddish at YIVO. They have a summer program. It's like 20 hours a week, 6 weeks. Stern old people. They will make you learn Yiddish. I was not a brilliant student, but I got good enough to at least, read my socialist Yiddish texts so I could do all my primary research for the book. It's a lot, man, a lot. Socialists have a limited vocabulary, but still. It was amazing because, my great-grandfather spoke Yiddish, but my mom, all she has left of that are these, scattered words. But there were so many words that I thought were my mother's baby talk to me that were just rather the survivals of Yiddish.
Molly, you said in undertaking this book, you wanted to learn for yourself whether the Jews of Eastern Europe could have saved themselves. Either way, into the diaspora or into their own state, or what? What is your answer in the end?
I don't even think this was like a conscious thing for me. I had many other more conscious motivations, but it was like that secret thing in you, that is urging you on, even though you wouldn't even articulate it as that. And I kept asking myself, I'm like, what is it? What is it I'm looking for? And it was that. It was like, was there a way we could have saved ourselves? And what I realized was that there wasn't. What could have saved us was if the larger powers, America, England, Soviet Union, the entire Western world, really, what could have saved us is if they had taken their obligations of solidarity to fellow humans seriously. But they didn't.
You said that if the United States hadn't passed restrictive legislation, I think it was 1924.
1924, yeah.
The Holocaust, and Israel, for that matter, might never have happened.
Absolutely. I mean, originally, back when Hitler was confined to Germany, his goal was essentially to expel and obviously torture, dispossess, randomly murder, but essentially expel Jews. And if Jews had been able to go to anywhere in the world, I don't even just blame America, right? Brazil is a very large country. Canada took 3,000 Jews. Australia, right?
Galveston, Texas, some people said.
Anywhere, really. The entirety of South America, right? These are massive swaths of land. If Western countries had taken those Jews, they would have been saved. Also, if England and France had taken seriously their defense treaties with Poland and had attacked Nazi Germany when Nazi Germany attacked Poland, something that they were obligated to do by their defense treaties, that would have stopped the Holocaust. If Poland had not been taken over, there would not have been a Holocaust. The Holocaust really comes from Hitler taking over countries with millions upon millions of Jews living there. That's really the source of it. And that betrayal of Poland, I think, is a very fundamental break in the order of things. Now, as for the creation of Israel, Ben-Gurion himself said that if the masses of European Jews, before or after the war, had been allowed to go to the United States, the place where the vast majority of Jews wanted to go because there was such a large Jewish community here and so many people had family here, right? Like the number one thing people wanted after the war was to be with family members who could help them rebuild their lives. If Jews had been able to go to the United States, there would not have been enough Jews to create Israel. That's just the truth. But the incredibly restrictive and frankly racist immigration laws of the U.S. and of so many of the other good Western democracies ensured that hundreds of thousands of Jews rotted in displaced persons camps. And obviously this is a lesson that we have in no way learned from today.
Are you trying to reignite a deep argument from the 40s between the Zionists and the diasporists who were intent on going west and those Jews who felt they absolutely needed their own state, including the man you don't mention in the book, Bibi Netanyahu?
Though I do mention his spiritual granddaddy, Vladimir Jabotinsky, a lot. And, Netanyahu's father was a secretary for Jabotinsky.
Yeah, absolutely.
Jabotinsky, the man that the Bund called the father of Jewish fascism. Now, it's not trying to reignite the debate. The debate is live and well between Jews who oppose ethno-nationalism and who oppose this fucking genocide and Jews who support it despite all logic and morality. I mean, this debate is an extremely, extremely, extremely live one. It's more that there has been a concerted effort to erase anti-Zionist Jews, to erase the cosmopolitan, the solidaristic, the dissident strands of our history and to homogenize everything into this Walmart-ass Zionism. There's been this real and historically violent attempt to claim all of Jewish history for Zionism, and I utterly reject this. I'm utterly disgusted by it. I mean, Jewish history is vast, it's diverse, it's long, it's varied, it's built on argument and dispute. And the idea that all of that, those thousands of years all over the world, could be flattened into support for a genocidal ethno-state, it disgusts me in its core. But one of the things that I want to do with this book is I want to show that there were Jewish movements, and not little Jewish movements, not marginal ones, but big ones, that opposed Zionism from its very start and always knew what it was going to be. They always knew that this was going to devolve into violence, into militarism, into oppression. They always knew it. And
that it would depend on the larger empires, too.
Exactly.
The British Empire in the founding, and surely the American Empire in Gaza in the last few years.
Exactly. I mean, there were so many reasons that the Bund opposed Zionism, but after the Balfour Declaration, when Zionism got the backing of the British Empire, one of the biggest reasons was that Zionism was a handmaiden of British imperialism. It depended, as the Bund said, on, quote, British bayonets.
Yeah, and it was there in case of trouble in Suez or any other place that the Brits were deeply invested in.
Exactly. And from the moment that Zionism got the support of the Balfour Declaration, the Bund was extremely attentive to what Zionism meant for Palestinians, to the fact that it had always meant expropriation of land, dispossession. It always meant farmers being driven off of their homes. The Bund reported about the Histadrut, which was the Zionist labor union, which excluded Palestinians from membership until the 60s. It was specifically formed to lock Palestinian workers out of the new Zionist economy. They always reported on these profoundly immoral actions because they were socialists and because they believed in human dignity and equality, and that human dignity and equality also applied to Palestinians.
Sum it up. What is the hope of Bundism for a world that needs it?
The more I wrote this book, the more I became convinced that the only thing that can save us from barbarism is solidarity across difference and democratic socialism.
Molly Crabapple, thank you so much for this conversation. Thank you for this incredibly exciting book. You are a great reporter, not only on the world out there 100 years ago, but on your own head, too. And it's a joy to hear you talk about it.
An absolute joy. Thank you so much for having me.
Molly Crabapple's story of the Jewish Labour Bund is titled, Here Where We Live is Our Country. Here at Open Source, we count on listener support. If you haven't done your part yet, please go to radioopensource.org/donate and pitch in now to keep the world's first and longest running podcast going strong. And leave a comment on what you're hearing. We're happy to be founding members of Hub and Spoke, a Boston-based collective of independent voices in podcasting. Check the range of our interests, technology to politics to history and art, at hubspokeaudio.org. You'll be glad you did. And thank you.